So we are on, and welcome to everyone who's here joining us. We're going to start right now at 7 o'clock. So thank you everyone for attending our webinar today, the first in 2025-2026 academic year. And so thank you all. This webinar is part of a webinar series organized by the Adult Education in International Context webinar series, as well as the Global and International Engagement Unit. Our guest today, we're very fortunate to have a distinguished guest today, is Vice President Dr. Dawn Whitehead. She's the Vice President of the Office of Global Citizenship for Campus, Community, and Careers at the American Association of Colleges and Universities in Washington, D.C. The focus of the conversation today is global learning and its role in excellence, in making excellence inclusive. For your information, the co-moderators today are Erin Bruce from the Eskenazi School. She's the Associate Director for Employer Relations and Alumni Engagement. And myself, Farida Pawan, Professor in Learning Design and Adult Education and School of Education. Finally, the webinar will take the form of 20-minute conversation with our distinguished guest speaker, and we follow that with about 30 to 40 minutes of question and answers with audience members. As we proceed, please, audience members, if we have quite a few questions already from audience members, but for those of you who've not yet posted questions, please do so. You can post anytime, either in the chat or in the Q&A panel. So again, thank you everyone for being here. Dr. Whitehead, could you please start with your introduction and a little bit of an insight into all the fantastic things that you are doing in Washington, D.C. Dr. Whitehead.
Okay, thank you so much. So I will thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm really happy to be with you tonight. And I want to start with just an overview. You'll see this and say, oh, she's going to talk for the hour, but I won't. Don't worry about that. What I want to do is start with a little bit of an overview of AAC&U and the global work that we do. Then I want to give some context around global learning that relates to the articles that were shared. And then third, I want to look at global learning in practice so we can sort of see some of the issues and challenges that you may have questions about. So with that, at AAC&U, we're an international membership-based organization. And so we have about 900 colleges and universities that are members of AAC&U, and it runs the gamut of open access, highly selective, predominantly white institutions, Hispanic serving institutions. So we really are a meeting ground for institutions of higher education around the world. And so through our work with our member institutions, we're able to look at a lot of different practices related to liberal education as a foundation for higher education and service to democracy. But what I do and what I was asked to talk a little bit about is the work that we're doing in a global framework. And so one of the first things that we have been doing in a global context is we've been doing research and work. We've had a number of working groups on mentored undergraduate research in global context. And I'll put this link to this publication in the chat. It's a free downloadable publication where we've looked at the integration of global learning, undergraduate research, and mentorship. And so we've looked at, what are the strategies, what are the factors that help to involving more students, more faculty, more staff. So we're looking at those who haven't historically been involved in these practices and how can we be intentional about integrating them. We've also looked a bit at some of the intercultural practices that are a part of it. Another thing that we have been doing in a global context at AAC&U is our work in terms of global health. And so we've had, for the past 8 years, we've done a number of professional development opportunities for faculty in particular. One is a faculty development workshop in Costa Rica, in Brunca, which is near the border with Panama. And we work with faculty, others who are looking at integrating experiential learning and global health. And then we also have a summer institute that we've been offering for about the past 10 years with Allegheny College, Child Family Health International, and a few other organizations. So global health is an area of work that we have been involved in. Another area of work we have partnered, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Interfaith America, but we've been partnering with Interfaith America for the last 10 years on issues related to interfaith competence and pluralism. And so we'd offered a summer institute on interfaith excellence for many years. And over the past 2 years, we have offered an event called Advancing Campus Pluralism. And how does this look in a global and domestic context? And then second to last, one thing, and I think this may come up in some of your areas of interest, is we've established an entity that's focused on virtual exchange and collaborative online international learning. And so we have two folks that have been working on this work. Most of it has been grant funded. One most recently was the Fulbright US UK Global Challenges Teaching Award, where we pair teachers from the US and faculty from the US and the UK. They look at issues of racial justice, inequality, climate change, and polarization and division. And the faculty work on developing courses where they will partner and actually implement. We also most recently received funding to do this grant related to creating centers of virtual exchange and COIL excellence in the Middle East and North Africa. And so that grant is just starting, but we're really excited about the potential. And that's also being funded by the State Department, which is really helpful. And then the last piece that we do that's related to global work, specifically at AAC&U, is our Institute on Experiential Learning and Engaged Dialogue. And so this is a team-based institution where institutions tend to send teams of 5 to 7 folks, faculty, staff, administrators, and they work on an initiative related to engaged learning or experiential learning or engaged dialogue. And many of those have a global focus. And so we work with those teams. We have faculty mentors, and they go back to their campuses with a plan for action. So that gives you a little bit of an overview. And lastly, and I'll share this publication with you as well, is we partnered with the American Political Science Association to produce 2 volumes of this Teaching Civic Engagement Globally. And it truly is a global perspective. So you'll see models from the US, from the UK, from South Africa, from Zambia, from many other parts of the world. So that's another resource that you may want to use. I don't think we can see very well, but I want you to think about this yourself. How would you describe your experience with global learning? Would you say a little experience, a bit like Coco Gauff? She's won 2 majors. Would you say some experience, like Naomi Osaka, who's won 4 majors? Or would you say a great deal? So think about where you are with global learning. All right. And with that, I want to jump into the framing. And some of these pieces you saw in the articles that were shared, but I just was invited to highlight some of the topics and frameworks. So global learning is indeed a learning process. And at AAC&U, we created a definition of global learning, working closely with faculty, staff, administrators from around the world and from many different disciplines. And so the definition that we came up with originally was that global learning is a process, a learning process that prepares students to critically analyze and engage with global systems and their implications for the lives of individuals and the sustainability of the earth. And so one of the things about global learning is, as global learning has been codified and developed, is it is connected to a lot of other areas and frameworks that you may have seen in your own work. And so one of the frameworks and one of the places where this came from is the broad field of international education. And many of you may be familiar with this. International education came about and really developed in the post-World War II period. And it's when we saw the development of peace studies, development studies, international studies, and it's when we started seeing an emphasis on student and scholar mobility. And so global learning, many people draw on the literature and the framework from international education. Others would look back at the concept of internationalization, which became popularized in the early 2000s, around 2005, 2006, is when Jane Knight developed her first definition of internationalization. And one of the things about internationalization, some have said it was higher education's response to globalization. And so early in the period, Jane Knight said that internationalization was an integration of an international and intercultural mission to the teaching, learning, and research mission of higher education. But in 2015, she offered this revised definition, where she says internationalization at the national, sector, and institutional levels is defined as the process of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, functions, or delivery of post-secondary education. So she expanded the definition a bit more to look at the sector level, to look at it from a national perspective, and not just to think about it uniquely from higher education. Now, in 2020, as we all know, there was a global racial reckoning, and we saw many in these areas start to think more about decolonization, to think more about how are we providing inclusive practices so that global learning, international education, internationalization involves all students, not just some. And many felt that Jane Knight's definition and framing was too limited to the West, too limited to the so-called global North, and so we saw different definitions and frameworks being developed around the world. One definition that has gained some traction and many people have started to embrace this, and you'll notice it's quite different from Knight's. Halida and Chassi, who are scholars based out of South Africa, created this definition where they said internationalization of higher education is a critical and comparative process of the study of the world and its complexities, past and present inequalities and injustices, and possibilities for a more equitable and just future for all. And they argue that you can do this through teaching, learning, research, and engagement, also, which is a bit different than the framing that Knight had. And they push us to think about epistemic plurality, the integration of critical anti-racist and anti-hegemonic learning about the world from diverse global perspectives to enhance the quality and relevance of education. So I share that with you as a different framing to look at this work. There are three other pieces when we look at this sort of foundational work in the area of global learning that we can see that we've drawn on as things have been developing. And one you may be very familiar with, and it may be a goal in your course, in your work, in your experiences. And the first is intercultural competence. And when you look at intercultural competence, this is something that many rely on the definition that Darla Deardorff coined, which is that intercultural competence is an ability to communicate effectively and appropriately in intercultural situations based on one's intercultural knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And with Deardorff's framework, she argues, and as do others that do work in this space, that competence is something that you don't necessarily achieve. So you never are there. It's something that you have to continue to wrestle with and think about. Others in this space have also looked at the concept of global citizenship. And global citizenship is in the title of my office at AAC&U. But it has become a problematic term in some places. And some people feel like citizenship implies that that there's a state connection, that you must be part of a state, even when you're thinking about it from a global perspective. One of the scholars whose frameworks we've looked at when we talked about and developed things related to global citizenship is, of course, Martha Nussbaum. And her work talks about the importance of building a rich network of human connections to help shape future democratic citizens who are poised to make decisions based on their understanding of others in society. And she has a concept known as the narrative imagination, which is one where you can understand and imagine the perspectives that others may have, and it may influence the way that you act, the way you vote, the way you engage with others. So, for example, I may be from Indianapolis, the north side of Indianapolis, Indiana, but when I'm voting and when I'm thinking about policies and practice and how I'm engaging with my colleagues, I can imagine what it might be like for someone growing up in rural Indiana, in Madison, Indiana, or I can imagine what it's like for someone who's growing up in a metropole in Kenya, in Nairobi. And so that narrative imagination where we draw on what we think the others have experienced helps us to make decisions and to act in different ways. One other scholar who has done some very interesting work in Global Citizen is Vanessa de Oliveira Andreotti. And she's created a wonderful framework for both soft and critical global citizenship that also helps us rethink how we see the nature of a problem, how we see a project involved in a community, how we are defining things. And it also helps us as we are thinking about global learning. One other piece, of course, is global perspectives. And a number of scholars also talk about the ability of students to understand and have this global perspectives. So there are two tools that you may have considered or you may think about using in your work. One, of course, the Global Perspectives Inventory was created by Larry Braskamp about 20 years ago. And he argued that you had to have both the curricular and the co-curricular piece because students had to engage these global perspectives in the classroom and out of the classroom, and they had to have opportunities to practice. The AAC&U value rubric, one of the dimensions is perspective taking. And again, this talks about how can a student engage and learn from perspectives that are different from their own? How can they draw on those perspectives? How can they understand the limitations of their own experiences? And how can they then take that into their academic work and into their field work and into their practice? The last piece that I think it's helpful to look at is the concept of cultural humility. And again, cultural humility is a lifelong process. You are always engaging and wrestling with this, and you may have to wrestle with it in each encounter. And so, what it argues is that you're thinking about, you're reflecting, it's their self reflection, there's a self critique, and you're thinking about in each encounter, how am I engaging with this person? How am I speaking to them? Am I speaking to them in a respectful way? Am I understanding where they're coming from? And this work came out of the health sciences. And so one of the things was they talked about the importance of the physician and the patient, and the physician relinquishing that expert role and realizing that they could be a full partner with the person that they're working with. And so when we think about cultural humility, again, when you look at the research and when you look at practice as you're trying to find sources to inform your work, again, it started in the health professions. Then it went into the service fields like library, ministry, leadership, and then phase three, about 5 years ago, you saw a lot more of this research happening in global education, global learning, community engaged research. So finally, I want to close with just two quick examples about global learning in practice. One of the things is when you are framing and thinking about global learning, many have gone back to the origins of global learning in the 1970s with the work out of the United Nations University. And the United Nations University had a division of global learning. And they argued that global learning, again, was not about being able to name all the rivers in West Africa, not naming all the mountain chains in Asia, but it was about the nature of global problems and determining what these processes are that can initiate change for the greater good. So they argue that global learning was social, you do it with other people. It is integrative, so it's not owned by a single field. It's not owned by people like me with a background in African studies. It's collaborative and it involves the synthesis of learning. And so I always like to share this definition of global learning by Hilary Landorf and Stephanie Dosher. They're out of Florida International University. And so you can see their local context in this definition. And they revised their definition in 2023 to add the last point. So their definition is that global learning is the process of diverse people collaboratively analyzing and addressing complex problems that transcend borders and engaging in actions that promote collective well-being. So in the work that they have done with this framework at Florida International University, all students are required to take at least 2 global learning courses. And so faculty and instructors that develop a course, they have to get their course designated as a global learning course based on this definition and based on this framing of learning. And they also identify how the students are demonstrating that they are global learners. So I think this is one great example through field experiences and through other practices. And I look forward to talking about more. The other example that I want to give you is from a different type of institution, and this is from WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And they are an institution that is project-based learning is at the heart of everything they do. And for their students, they also believe it's critical that their students develop global citizenship and have global learning as part of their experience. So there are 3 requirements for students. One is called a Great Problem Seminar. It's a first-year experience where students work in teams over 2 terms, and they step out of their disciplines to solve a global problem. So you could be an anthropology major. They do have liberal arts majors there in addition to STEM folks, but they're working on teams to recognize all of the skills and all of the things that different disciplines can bring to global problems. The second thing they have to do is the IQP, the Interactive Qualifying Project. This is their junior year. Again, this is another team-based, it's a longer-term project. Many of them take place off campus in other parts of the world, in other communities, so that they're actually looking at these global problems from the perspectives of those in the community. And then finally, they have their major qualifying project, again, that also has a global perspective as a part of it. And so with that, I want to turn it back over to our hosts and get into some questions.
Awesome. Those are incredible thought points for us as we proceed into the discussion. And so I think what we're going to do is to, have Erin start off with 2 burning questions that she has for you. Erin?
Thank you so much, Dr. Whitehead. That was so informative, especially the definitions that you shared with us. My questions come through the lens of career and professional development, which is what I work in here at Indiana University. And my first question is, how can students effectively articulate their global learning experiences in their resumes, cover letters, and interviews to stand out to employers seeking culturally agile professionals?
I think there are a couple of ways that students can do this, and some of it goes back to their faculty and their educators that are designing these experiences, because students should have an opportunity to reflect on their experiences. And once they're able to reflect, there are certain skills that can be brought out of those experiences. So, for example, we know from AAC&U, we do employer surveys every few years. And some of the skills that come up repeatedly, and we also see this with the NACE competencies, is that employers want students that can demonstrate teamwork, not just that they can say it, but they've done it. So if a student has a global experience, for example, something like, a global health student who is doing work in the local community with a global community, or they're doing work internationally, and they're actually working in teams to develop the work, students can bring those examples back when they're interviewing. They can also name those skills as they have their experiences on their resumes. Another experience, digital literacy. When students have opportunities to engage in COIL or virtual exchange, they can demonstrate those skills through those experiences. So I think we have to go back and make sure students are able to name or tag the skills that they're learning from their courses and speak to specific examples that they've had in the field or in the practice. So I think those are a couple of things that help. And as educators, as faculty, as staff who are working with students, we have to also communicate this directly to students and be intentional and transparent and say, we're having this global experience and you are going to have these skills out of it. It shouldn't be a secret, and they shouldn't have to try to figure out what those skills are.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Are those reports available for everyone to view?
Yes, they are. So I'll put a link in the chat for that as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My next question is, in what ways might international global learning opportunities help students develop the problem-solving, communication, and adaptability skills employers increasingly value in a diverse and globally connected workforce?
Again, I think it really comes to the types of experiences that students have, and I think being intentional and making sure that we're able to to communicate that directly, as I said before. But it also is about what types of assignments are we giving students? Are we giving students assignments where they're also demonstrating those skills? Are we giving students assignments where they're working together across differences? And are students able to identify what their strengths are, what they can bring to the case, so we don't just say, okay, get in a group and work together. It's magic. No, we have to create the right conditions and the right environment where students are able to work together. We also, it's really important to give students an opportunity to, I mean, this is always controversial to say, but to give them an opportunity where if they fail, the stakes aren't so high that they can't learn from it. So when students are able to work together and there are multiple opportunities to work on something, and they can say, oh, that didn't work, so what we did was this. And I think that's something that also speaks to employers, to recognize that if a student learns something doesn't work, oh, I was able to figure out this other way of doing it, and maybe I learned about something from another cultural context or another country that had an approach to this project. So I drew on a broader network than just what I knew here in my local environment.
Mhm. Fantastic. So one of the things that, we have a slew of questions for you, and I think I want to take Mary's question because she posted it on the Q&A panel, and she asked about global learning and undergraduate research are often underutilized by underrepresented students. And so her question is, how do you intentionally redesign these experiences to close the participation gaps?
Mhm. Absolutely. So there are a number of things that you can do in this. One is by integrating these experiences into required experiences for students, so it's not an opt-in. So are there research programs? Are there are there capstones? Are there requirements within the major in the School of Education per se that require students to have these experiences? Another way that we can think about adapting these gaps is to think about, who are the faculty and staff that are working with students? Do students see themselves in these experiences? And so professional development and preparing faculty and staff from diverse backgrounds to do this. One of the things that we learned when we worked on the publication that I put in the chat, is we learned that some people had the perception that research was only for STEM, and we know that's not the case. And so by helping students recognize and see that students from all majors can participate, that also changes things, because then they don't say, oh, research is just for my friends that want to go into medicine or just for my friends that want to do that, but showing students and sharing the research that we're doing and letting them know they can be a part of it. But the big piece is, again, making sure this is a part of something that all students can and may want to do. A couple of other examples that have changed over the years. We, in the publication, you'll see this as well, and this is a free download. One of the things we looked at were some of the programs that the NSF had developed. So, from LSAMP, which is the Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation in STEM, many of those centers have been closed, but we can still look at the strategies and practices that they use to increase participation for students of color who are often underrepresented. And so, again, they went to meet students where they are. They had students think about and talk about undergraduate research at their first year during orientation, and it became something that was for everyone, not just for honor students or not just for a set group of students. So those are a few strategies that help to increase the numbers. But we have a section in this publication about inclusive practices. So you'll see a number of strategies to increase the numbers of students who historically haven't been a part of these experiences.
Right. I think one of the things that you said is really powerful, working with faculty who come from, from the community of the different communities of the students, or representatives of the communities from which the students are emerging from. And I think at School of Ed, we had a project called the Cool Mentors Project, whereby, we had uh, faculty from various communities leading students overseas. Tina O'Neill, for instance, is one of them. She took them to Kenya. We had folks in Germany talking about sports and racial differences, and we have folks going to India looking at arts education. So all those types of things. So I think that had a lot of impact, primarily because students see themselves in the leaders of those trips. And so, Erin, you had another question from coming up from one of our friends.
Yes, I do. I feel like you've touched on this a little bit, but Natalia asks from our course, what can schools do to help students who can't study abroad? You touched on assignments and integrating work into assignments, but should they spend, I think they, meaning schools, spend more money on these programs or change how people think about them?
I believe in the concept of why not both. And I think one of the things with education abroad, and I will share that I'm the vice chair of the board of the directors for the Forum on Education Abroad. So I'm an advocate of education abroad. I believe in it. But by adding other dimensions of global learning for students that aren't taking place in international context, it only enhances those experiences for students who go abroad. And so if students have this global perspective and have an understanding of how things work globally, it strengthens their work when they go abroad or if they don't. So I don't think that there should be an effort to not focus on education abroad, but I think we have to focus on embedding global learning across the curricular experiences for students. And then when students go abroad, they bring that global perspective. There can be some occasions when a student may participate in an education abroad program and they may focus just on what's happening in that country. They may not make any of those connections to what's happening around the world. They may not see something as a global issue. So, for example, I used to take students to Ghana. And my students, if I wasn't careful, I could have said, this is a comparative education course where we're just looking at Ghana, or an international course. But instead, I had a global perspective where students were able to make comparisons about what was happening in Ghana and what was happening in other parts of the world as well. So they're able to see those global issues. We talked about literacy. We talked about English as a second language. In Ghana, English is the official language, but students speak multiple languages. What does that look like? And so I think when you add that global lens, it enhances the international experiences, and students can have very rich, in-depth experiences without leaving the country. Doesn't mean we don't want them to, but that can and should be a focus of institutions.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question from Beth here who asked a question in terms of what has been your experience with providing virtual exchanges of students and the types of support you provide.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that question. So I have to tell you, in 2006 or 2007, we had a virtual exchange program at Indiana University, what was then known as Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. And so I taught a course with the University of Tehran. And so there were undergraduate students from liberal arts that I taught, and we were paired with Masters of North American Studies students there. And what I had to work with then was very different than what's out there today. So there's a lot of information and a lot of resources out there today. We have resources on our website. SUNY Coil has a lot of great resources for how to structure a course, and Florida International University has a lot of great resources. And what they often talk about is, one, you start with an icebreaker so that you can get to know each other. There's some sort of project or activity. The students work together and then they present together. So I think the key is making sure that the students are working together on something. So again, those three sources are places that you can find some information. If you're looking for partners, there's Coil Connect, which is a great network to connect folks. But I think the other thing, and this is where I should have started, is the most important thing is that the two faculty that are working together must come together and talk about their learning goals and outcomes, because we've developed so much in Coil and Virtual Exchange. It used to be, isn't this cool? We're connecting with the class in Kenya, or we're connecting with the class in Indonesia. But now it's really about the learning and what is it that students are doing? How are they learning together? So I hope those resources are helpful to you, but you can see a lot of great tools and tactics for doing it.
On our campus too, we have several of those, like the global classroom that Vesna Dimitrievska runs, the
Oh, yes.
PhD lab by Michael Hamburger, the
Mhm.
client-based project by Ellie Cohen.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so we have a few of those examples here locally that you talked about. Erin, you had another question from another one of our folks?
Absolutely. So, classmate Jasmine on our Q&A here, how can colleges measure or keep track of how many students are really getting deep global learning experiences that are built into their regular classes and activities beyond just counting who studies abroad?
Jasmine, that is a great question. And I think there are a few different models that we see. So, one example is the example that I shared from Florida International University, where they actually have courses that are tagged as global learning courses. And then you can sort of say, okay, we can measure it this way. Other institutions where there is as part of institutional assessment, where students, after they take a particular course or a particular program, there's an assessment that students do related to, did they have this global experience? So I think those are the ways we could do it. But when we don't have labels or when courses aren't tagged, it's harder to capture. And that's one of the challenges that we've seen as we have talked to institutions about expanding global learning opportunities. Because if it isn't course based or it isn't on the transcript or curriculum, it's hard to capture. One example, and I think that this may be happening in the College of Arts and Sciences in Bloomington, but I don't know if it's happening in the School of Ed, is there's been an emphasis on experiential learning. And one aspect, of course, is global learning. And so they are now capturing the information that way. So that's one of the ways that we're really able to see it, is when courses are tagged, or even institutions that have co-curricular transcripts where there's a co-curricular experience that's global and it's labeled as global, and students have that. So those are some of the ways. And then lastly, some institutions are using digital badging. And so they may have digital badging for global, digital badging for other things. And so that's another way that we've seen some folks capture these experiences.
I think in the project that we're about to have in about 2 weeks is exactly that, which is the intercultural competency batch. And so
Mm.
I think that's part of what we're doing here as well. So I think the next question, fantastic. The next question is from Jamie, and I think one of the she's asking you directly in terms of the current global challenges that AAC&U is helping institutions to prepare for, and in terms of shaping the priorities of education is a big question, right? And so, but it's a real one too, in the sense that how is your institution preparing for the future or for the changes that are happening on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think one thing is being involved in conversations, globally and domestically. We have a group of presidents who have been meeting more regularly. It's called the President's Trust, but we've got another group of presidents who are coming together to talk about what are these challenges, what is it that we can be doing, how do we work together. So I think that's one piece. Being part of the global conversation, because what's happening in the US is not unique necessarily. We've seen this in other parts of the world. So in the end of May, early June, I was in Prague as part of a global forum on higher education's on the role of higher education to advance democratic purposes. And so we were partnering with the Council of Europe, with the International Association of Universities, and we had 3 days of meetings where we talked about these issues and what is it that we should be doing. How are we countering this, and I don't even know if this is the right word. How are we countering this climate of misinformation where knowledge is not valued from a university where it once was, where the social contract between the state and the university is rapidly declining. And how are we addressing this? How do we come together to say there has to be something that we agree on that's fact, or we have to agree with something on knowledge? And so that is another way that we're addressing this, is having these conversations and coming and trying to develop action steps after we have these meetings. So it's great that we're meeting, but what are we going to do? And so I think those are the things that we have been wrestling with and working with, and recognizing that what's happening now is unique. Many of us were shocked by it, but we can't just sit back and say, oh, wow, isn't this wild? No, we have to come together and figure out what we can do to try to address some of these real challenges.
Mhm. Erin, do you have another question? Yes, it is. It is. It's keeping us on our toes for sure. Erin?
Yes. Janine asks, IU is focusing on serving Indiana and beyond. What excites you about global service learning for students or staff?
Oh my goodness. Well, so many things excite me about global service learning and community engaged learning for faculty, staff, students, all of the above. I think one of the things, it's a wonderful way to learn more about the community. And so whether you're doing community-based global learning in Indiana or in Ghana or in Asia, wherever you're doing it, you learn more about the community and you learn more about the people who are part of your community. And it only enhances and helps us become better community members. One of the things that we have seen in higher education and society more broadly, and Putnam wrote about this, the fact that we used to be a country of joiners, and we're not that anymore. And that's especially true for students today. And when you think back, people used to be active in the Kiwanis Club. They used to be active in these organizations, and we're not seeing as much participation. People used to go to faith-based institutions and do these things. And so we aren't seeing as much of that. And many argue that that's one of the reasons that we're seeing a decline in civic engagement, less involvement, less seeing those connections. And to me, when you get involved in community service, globally based or local, you have a better sense of understanding who the people are in your community. It gives you a way to understand folks. It gives you a better way to contribute to your society, and you have a better sense. So I think it's wonderful for all of the above, students, faculty, staff. I think it helps us understand our local context better. And I think, as you said, Indiana University is focused on serving, the communities in Indiana and beyond. But our communities in Indiana are from the globe. And so it just enhances and it helps us recognize who Hoosiers really are. Not who Hoosiers were 100 years ago, but who are Hoosiers today.
Mhm. I think there's a poster somewhere that's a logo of our unit too. Indiana in the world and the world in Indiana.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Uh, I think related to what you just said, Ashley had a question. I mean, you mentioned about staff and global learning and all members of our, workplace community. Ashley particularly had a question about workplace uh, in design and competency, intercultural competency and global learning in the workplace.
Mhm.
How do you adapt these principles to train employees, in an increasingly multicultural environment?
Yeah, I think a number of employers that we have worked with, they have talked about one, again, as you said, the diversity of employers in their workplace, but also the companies that have connections internationally and globally. And so you may have to connect with someone from India. You may have to connect with someone from China. You may have to connect. And so recognizing that these skills are necessary for both, like these intercultural skills, cultural humility, they help you engage and work with others. And so employers in some cases have been developing tools and strategies and short-term professional development opportunities to address these things. But what we hear repeatedly from employers is that when students enter the workforce, they want them to have these skills. There's a gap in terms of what students have and what they want them to have. And engaging with other people, understanding different perspectives, that's an area of a gap. And so some employers, of course, are offering training or professional development on site, but they also want to see that we're preparing them as the university for it. So I think we're seeing a lot of employers who are preparing. I remember, maybe 30 years ago when someone said, and there was data to support this, that people don't leave jobs because of the work, they leave because of the work environment and the people that they're working with. And so employers recognize the importance of preparing folks for this workforce.
Mm-hmm. We have a professor, Charlie Nelms. I think you know him as well. And so
Oh,
he raised his hand.
okay.
And so please join us, Professor Nelms.
Yes.
Let me see. Professor Nelms, if you want to join us, or you can post your question. Let me see. If you could post your question so that we can see it, Professor Nelms, that'd be great. Let me see, attendee. Professor Nelms, could you say something?
Yes. Okay, we can see you now.
Professor Nelms, we can see you, and if you want to join us verbally, you could.
I think you can turn the mute off.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, Don Whitehead. My goodness, it's been a long time. So here's what I'm trying to reconcile. This emphasis on intercultural, international kind of focus at a time when we're living at a time when there's such a kind of we can't even talk about what's happening domestically. So how can we have a serious conversation about global issues when we can't talk about what's happening here? You understand what I'm saying? Talk to me about that. How do you all reconcile that kind of tension within AAC&U?
Yeah, so there are two or three things. I think one, we reconcile it by looking at the employer piece. And employers repeatedly are telling us that they want students to be able to work across differences. They want students to be able to work with folks across the world because that's where their work is. And they are still pushing for this. And so we have looked at some examples. I'll give one example. One of our board members is from Alamo College's district in Texas. And we know about the legislation in Texas that's happened, but they have received additional funding and they have been able to continue to advance the work because it has focused on workforce development. And employers want highly credentialed folks that can do the work, and doing the work means engaging with others. So I think we have talked about this before. Sometimes the language may have changed, but when we are linking it to what employers are saying they want, what we know society needs, that has helped us to continue to have this conversation. I would say it is not easy in some places. It's harder in some places than others. But when we're able to link it to skills, that's when we've had the most success. And the global work is necessary for the skills that employers are seeking. And it also speaks to our, again, engagement with the community. Despite the fact that we know some folks have a different perspective on that, if we are able to link it to work, link it to the community engagement, that has been something that has continued to work for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question, because it's not easy.
Yes, it's not easy. I think we had that discussion too, because in the past, there's always been a tension between international work and work that relates to what happens here domestically.
Mhm.
But, I think obviously your focus on workplace requirements and that there's a place for everyone in the discussion. Erin, did you have another question to bring in from one of our one of our friends, classmates, audience members in general? Please also continue to post your questions. We have a slew of questions that have already been sent to us, but we welcome yours as well, and we'd love to hear from you.
So we do have one that's been waiting in the chat. Would you like me to proceed with that one?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So we have one from Vesna. How can we as educators work towards seeing global learning as an integrative component of any educational experience and not as an add-on?
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that question, Vesna. And I think Vesna can speak to this question quite a bit herself too. I think one of the things is again making sure this is part of the educational experience for all students. So when institutions are revisiting, I was just with a campus 2 weeks ago that is looking at revising its general education. Is global learning a part of general education? How does it connect to those broad learning outcomes that institutions have? When it is a part of the learning outcomes, when it's more than just a mission because again, almost all colleges and universities have something about global or the world and beyond in their mission. But when you're looking specifically at learning outcomes, that is where you can make sure that it is integrated. How does it fit across the institution's learning outcomes? I think that is something that also helps. The employer case works in some settings, but we all know there are some people that said learning is for learning's sake. Stop trying to make it connect to work. And we have to speak to all audiences. And so global learning is just good learning. It's good practice. It's similar to what we've heard about inclusive pedagogies. These are strategies and skills that benefit all students, not just those, who have, those who opt into certain majors. So I think it really has to be a part of the broader institutional learning outcomes and then the learning outcomes at the schools as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that our lives, regardless of where we live, is multicultural, very diverse, very, our everyday existence, everywhere we are, those skills to
Right.
engage with others is very important and it's part of all learning. So I think Nicole has a question on recruitment. How can we do a better job of the recruitment process to highlight the benefits of global learning experiences beyond study abroad and language education classes? Nicole teaches language arts, and so she's kind of hoping to talk beyond those realms.
Yeah, again, I think you speak to the value of contributing and being an active, productive member of your community. I think you speak about democratic preparation and engagement. One of the things that being a member and being someone who lives in a pluralistic society is recognizing and understanding diverse viewpoints, understanding perspective taking, understanding the diversity of culture, of community, of ethnicity, of race, of gender, of all of these factors. And that comes from these types of global experiences, and students have an opportunity to see it in different realms. And so I think that's one of the things is it helps you become a productive member of society. It helps prepare you for the workforce, and it prepares you for life generally. And I think those are some of the things that can help, is along with some of the wonderful things that students learn when students talk about these experiences. What did they enjoy? These experiences can be fun, and it's okay to talk about the fact that they can be fun and they're wonderful. You have an opportunity to meet people from different parts of the world, to learn different things, to go from sort of the superficial where, I learned to make this dish that's, it's a dish that's prepared in Thailand. But then I also understand the cultural differences in these things. So I think it's okay to focus on the fun, but also to recognize the deep centered areas that will help you as a person as well. One thing that always comes out of the work that I've done and work that I've seen for education abroad, but for global experiences that are domestically, is also that students learn even more about themselves. So they learn about the other communities, other cultures, broader, perspectives, but they learn a lot about themselves. And that's also very important for students. And that also can help with the recruitment piece.
It is amazing, isn't it, that one international experience, even a very short-lived one,
Mm-hmm.
can be quite transformative. And we see that over and over again. 1 week trip abroad, just changes very quickly the perspective. And I think one of the things that you're alluding to is the danger of the 5 Fs, which is
Yes.
food, festivals, flags, famous people. I can't remember the fifth
Right.
one. To kind of go, essentially the iceberg, right? To look
Yes.
beyond the
Yes.
surface to the deeper level of values and beliefs, and that's what we're after in education.
Right. Can I say one more thing too? You just reminded me. Even, I had a colleague who had a COIL virtual exchange experience, and the students, the students not only connected, in the class, then they traveled and visited each other in their countries. And there was one case where students even got married. I'm not saying that that's why we do this, but again, even with virtual exchange and COIL, if the experience is crafted well, it can be a very impactful experience for students. And I think that's the key with all of this is how are we creating quality global learning experiences for students? What are we doing to make sure it's, again, not just great, we went to West Africa or we went to Mexico, or, we have I'm having this experience in my course with students from India. But how are you crafting it to be a quality experience where the students are reflecting on what they're learning and they're also learning collaboratively with their colleagues? So I think that's another key to this is the quality of the experience, not just that we're doing it.
Yeah, I think that was one of Mary's question, which is how do you distinguish a high quality global learning undergraduate experience from something not so?
Yeah, well, I think one thing I would go to is if many of you are likely familiar with high impact practices. So George Koo originally worked with AAC&U and others to develop this list of 11 high impact practices, one of which is global learning, of course. But George Koo and Ken O'Donnell created a list of quality dimensions of high impact practices. So again, it's not high impact just because you have a global learning experience. You have to put these dimensions into it. One of the dimensions they talk about is sustained learning. So students are engaging in the practice for a while. So that means if you are thinking, Aaron, you shared you had a short-term experience in Ghana. And so instead of just going to Ghana for a week, were there opportunities for you to engage before and after? So that helps to sustain the experience. Another example is students having an opportunity to demonstrate their competence publicly. Now, that may not mean speaking to the mayor's office or speaking to the city council, but who's the public audience that you can relate to? So they have a whole list of practices of dimensions that you can apply to these experiences to make them high impact. And so I think those are things that can help ensure that you're having a quality experience and not just, a one-off that, yes, it's global, but, those are things that you can do to make sure it's quality.
I have three more short questions, but I'm going to refer to Erin before I launch into them. Erin?
I have covered all the ones on my end, so please do proceed.
So, so I have three brief ones, and again, audience members, we have a few minutes. If you want to shoot any of the question, do so now, and we'd love to hear from you. So I have three short, brief questions for you to respond to. One is, I think you've touched on an area that we've already talked about, which is, where is the intersection between international education and domestic diversity concerns that we have here? Because there's always an unintentional tension between, what are our priorities here? Where do we bridge the two? I think that's one of the areas of tensions in this work. The other is the misconception that international work is for the privileged, for the privileged few. And so that's also something I think that concerns us all. And we've just had here at IU in the programs that we have at the School of Education, the types of people who go we're very proud of them because they come from all areas of life, and with support from the school. And so I think the third one, I think, is in terms of, I think, Janine's question, which I think is really also interesting. She's an engineer, so she always has STEM questions. I think the other question that she asked is, what would make you do your job better? I thought she's putting that on you to see, you're doing this great work. What could be, how could you do this better? What else, you see that would help you move forward?
Mhm. So thank you for those three. I think one, in terms of the intersection with domestic diversity, I think this is also what Professor Nelms was getting at too.
Mhm.
One of the things is so I have been working on a research project where initially we were looking at the alignment of these practices, and obviously a lot has happened to change, that research in light of what's happening from legislation. But I would like to go back to the research we started. This was in 2022, where we interviewed students from 8 different institutions, and we asked these questions to students. And we said, what do you see as the intersections between these practices? And a number of the students, the majority of the students we interviewed said, you can't have one without the other. You cannot do these without seeing them as integrated. One student shared an example of, he said this was a student who was from a university on the West Coast. And he said that he had no idea that people in France knew about George Floyd. And then he saw on social media, oh, they know about George Floyd and they have similar situations. And so it opened his eyes to the fact that issues that we are seeing from this lens, they're happening in other parts of the world, and we can come together. Another thing that we found early on, this also came about with the movement to remove Confederate monuments. There was a movement a few years ago to remove statues of Cecil Rhodes in South Africa, and it was called Rhodes Must Fall, Fees Must Fall. And students were connecting on social media. So students have been making these connections, and they see the integration. They see how these practices are connected. So I think that we understand this. Also, another, just for those that are looking for citations, Crystal George Mwangi out of George Mason University, Chris Glass out of Boston, they have been writing about why we need the lens of diversity as we're engaging with international students. Because they've argued for too long, we've had these perceptions, not everyone, but some, that international students are just international students, not looking at the intersectionality among them, not looking at the different traditions, different things they bring. Some may come from a particular part of their country where they represent wealth or different things, but there's a lot of difference among the international students. And if you don't bring that lens in, you run the risk of just assuming all international students are the same. And so we do them a great disservice. So I think that intersection is there. And I would say there were a number of institutions that were looking at this seriously and were making a lot of great progress. There were even some institutions where you had a role that connected the two. So you had a person that was over multicultural issues and international or global, or you had a person that, so I think there are a lot of cases and examples where you see that those connections. I think, again, this focus on the privilege and this belief that it's for the privilege is when you only focus on mobility. So when we're only thinking about who can travel, it can be focused on the privilege, because if there aren't things in place to facilitate travel for all students, then it makes it a challenge. I think also the more we hear from students who are having these experiences globally, either internationally or in a local context, when they are speaking of the value and we're expanding the value and the opportunities for these experiences, I think it does continue to that perception. But I think when we look at global learning for all, that makes a great difference. Lastly, I think what would help me do my job better is being able to engage with even more institutions. Because one of the things that we do at AAC&U is we don't just create ideas, and we don't just sit in Washington and say, oh, we get the ideas and the work and what we're working on from our member institutions. And so more participation and more engagement with even more diverse institutions really helps me do my work well. And that's one of the best things that I love about AAC&U is one day I'm working with LaGuardia Community College. The next day I'm working with someone from, University of North Carolina, Pembroke, which is, as a majority Native institution. And so just that opportunity. So I think that opportunity to engage more is what would help me do my job better.
Fantastic. Amazing information, amazing conversation. Erin, before we sign off, do you have anything to say or conclude?
No, just thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I agree. We learned a lot.
I see that a family member joined you, Erin, and so wonderful.
A tiny one.
So again, Dawn, I can't express enough how grateful we are to you always being available to share with us your thoughts and your, your insights into all the work that you do. We love the fact that we see you and that you come to us every time, we ask for help. So Dawn, again, greatest appreciation. And we hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Good night, everyone.